Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food? To disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims. Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make. And folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Yo, welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. I'm your host, Scott Maddox.
And I'm Paul Sheehan, the producer and co-host. And we're two overweight white guys wearing plaid shirts as protest versus safety pins. So we even got the same collar thing going on here, you know?
Button collars.
I'm sorry, I'm overweight. I can't speak for Scott, so I don't want to body shame him.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For that. So, yeah, it was an interesting week this week. I think there was an election in America.
There was?
Some people voted, some people didn't. Yeah, and then there was election results, which often happens when you vote and then you count the votes, and yeah. Some people are happy, some people aren't.
I'm skeptical of that. In either case, Scott, we have some news items, man. You really dug up some good stuff I want to talk about with atheists who are they're either gained seats or holding on to seats. They're like open atheists. Really exciting.
Yep. The political landscape is changing a little bit. There's a lot more atheists that are openly running for various levels of government. Some of them who just won election are in Arizona. There was Juan Mendez. He won an Arizona state Senate seat after vacating state house or state general assembly seat that he had also won. He was one of the few openly atheists who was in any state legislature. And
Juan Mendez is known because in 2013 he gave a secular invocation for opening there, and he quoted Carl Sagan, which is, and I believe it's stated that he kind of idolized Carl Sagan, which is a well-known scientist, supporter of science, and atheist who passed away a few years ago due to cancer. Ran the original show called Cosmos, which was really popular during the 80s. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, it's good. And also, it wasn't like we traded one seat for another, but Mr. Mendez, or Senator Mendez's seat, was also won by another open atheist. What is her name? Athena Salman. And and Juan Mendez, along with Ernie Chambers in Nebraska, are probably the highest ranking atheist elected politicians in the country currently, or come January.
So what you're saying is that this is not just a fluke, where it's an anomaly where an atheist stepped in. In fact, somebody replaced his old seat, who's also an atheist. So
yes,
we're seeing
we're
momentum.
Maintaining and expanding. And also Ernie Chambers is he's been pretty popular in Nebraska. They put term limits on his seat, so he got out because of that, because he was there for too long. Then he ran again and he got back in, so he'll have to run that clock out again, maybe.
Cool.
There was also others. There was Jewish humanist Jamie Raskin in Montgomery County, Maryland, who won a U.S. House seat. Melissa Sargent, an openly agnostic Wisconsin state representative, won re-election.
So you're saying this isn't all bad news?
Right, it's not all bad news, and I believe
there was a Hail Mary play.
Bad news, good news.
Yeah.
It all depends on which side you are backing or what issues you are backing.
There was a Hail Mary play that unfolded out in Oklahoma that almost everyone was sure was going to go the way of Christian conservatives. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
In Oklahoma?
Yeah.
So there was this ballot initiative or referendum called Oklahoma Question 790. It failed. It would have allowed religious organizations to use state funding, which even if it had passed referendum vote, it probably would have ended up with the state being sued by the federal government simply because it's a clear violation of the establishment clause or anti-establishment clause.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably more accurate.
It's interesting because with Oklahoma, now they won, or in this case they voted no, 57%, and it was an interesting vote because that state is notorious for courting kind of religious figures, letting religions pretty much get away with whatever they want. I know followers of our show, probably know that Scientology's Narconon headquarters is in Oklahoma, which is part of Pittsburgh County. And the sheriff out there, Joel Kearns, is effectively advocated for them. They have been caught courting in state senators in that state. And it's pretty well known that if you are religious, you can do really well in Oklahoma and get your way. And if you're a politician in Oklahoma, you pretty much need to sell yourself to any religious interest in that state. So I'm very proud of the people of Oklahoma who used reason and law. Law is a big thing here, to not put themselves in a position where they were going to wind up getting sued by the federal government. It was a smart move, Oklahoma.
Yeah. And this is in the same climate where multiple states now are having lawsuits currently where 10 commandments have been put up on public land, and they're trying to determine whether these are legal or not, and they don't always just get removed. Sometimes it's like an ongoing battle. Sometimes it could end up with like a bad legal precedent that allows more of these things that we don't want on public land.
And I know during the show we're going to get, once we come back from our news segment, we're going to get into a little more about the implications of SCOTUS appointees and things and how that might be affected. But as far as right now, I think it's really important for people. I know I've seen a lot of these videos going around with people having breakdowns and stuff. A lot of people stood up and did the right thing, and they did it in places I think where people weren't necessarily expecting it. So take heart, all is not lost.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say this is good news or bad news, but I was looking. This is a statement of fact. The Democratic Party gained seats in both chambers of Congress. Republicans control both chambers, but Democrats gain seats. So I'm not saying that's good or bad news. I'm just saying them's the facts.
Yeah, I mean, and that may be underreported in the main news. And I think when people think about being an atheist and skeptic show, I think people are on edge right now, and their nerves are kind of tweaked over whether is religion going to get a steamroll through the Senate and the Congress. And it's not saying you can't find people on the Republican side that aren't a little more thoughtful when it comes to religious issues, but I think right off, Democrats seem to have a better track record on that kind of issue. So, and any other thoughts on that, or should we get ready to go to our break here?
There's a few more small items that kind of want to touch on. Colorado passed a death with dignity law.
Right.
So Colorado, along with California, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and Montana, now have that as an option for people, near the end of their life, and they have that as an option now legally.
Are you saying that Jack Kevorkian did not die in vain? Thank you, Jack.
It's quite possible.
Being dogmatic here. So, all right.
And and I mean, I don't take a position on this really, and I don't know if this has anything to do with skepticism, but I did hear a lot about marijuana becoming legal in some way, shape, or form in a lot of states after this election cycle. Whether that's medicinal marijuana or for recreational use.
Yeah, medicinal. Yeah, medicinal. Who are they kidding?
FDA? Is that who they're kidding?
Yes, yeah. It's like, you may not be spiritual, man, but I'm going to get high. I'm just messing with you.
So, you ready for a break?
Yeah, we can go ahead and go to our break. When we come back, we're going to get into election 2016, being skeptical and kind of trying to understand what happened, what's coming forward.
Yeah.
Kind of take a look at how and why things are working the way they're working.
Yeah, compare and contrast some different political systems and some stuff that we do in America or have done or might do in the future.
All right.
One of the goals of an atheist community is to provide support for those who find themselves without faith in light of mounting evidence against unfounded beliefs. Organizations with this goal range from skeptic groups to humanist service meetups to support groups for those who may have lost a community through their deconversion. In response to this, Recovering from Religion, an organization that seeks to support those who have left their faith, has recently launched the Hotline Project. This is not a deconversion hotline. The motive behind the project is to support a growing population of people who have left their faith and need to construct their identities around a new, beautiful reality. If you want more information, you can visit the Recovering from Religion website at recoveringfromreligion.org.
Good.
Homemade noodles. Oh. Marty, stop it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It reminds me, I've been thinking maybe we should try a new form of birth control. I heard about this one, it's called the IUD, intrauterine device. Or we could try the patch on your arm. Actually, I think that one goes on your butt.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
What do you think, though? Arm or the butt?
There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Oh my God, we're back.
We're back.
People watching? They're looking at us.
So, one of the things I've been hearing about a lot in the news since the election results favored Trump in the Electoral College and favored Clinton in the popular vote was all this talk about the Electoral College. Now, like, some of you might not know what the Electoral College is or might not quite remember it from, like, government class in high school or civics class or something like that. But I think basically maybe we should, like, define some of these things, you know, how our government works first, and then get into, like, you know, is it, like, a good system? Like, what effects does it have? Stuff like that. So basically, like, the Electoral College, you know, it consists of electors, and you've got well, basically, it's got 538 votes, and these electors are picked various ways depending on the state, you know. And because there's 100 senators in the Congress and 435 plus 3 for DC in the House of Representatives, that's how many electors we've got. And here people talking about 270 a lot. That's how many of those electors you need to get an electoral college win. But you know, a lot of people don't understand quite how it works, and of course, it works differently in different states. Most states in the United States give out electoral votes based off the popular vote. A few states like Nebraska and Maine do it proportionate or some system related to proportionality.
Right. Ultimately, and it goes back to states. Like our federal system does not actually run the election process. The state runs its own process that determines who they are picking for president. So a lot of people are under the mistake that a popular vote is something that's that is counted by the federal government. It's not. No. And as Scott was pointing out, most states, whoever wins the popular vote in that state, all the electoral votes go to that candidate. There's, as he was pointing out, 2 states where depending on the zone that you're in, or I forget what they call it, like what, you know, whatever
district.
District, yeah, it's district. So there's. And this is kind of interesting because I've always been one of these people that was like, hey, you know, we should get rid of the Electoral College. You know, in a real democracy, everyone's vote should be the thing that counts. And then people have to kind of look at, well, okay, the history of our country and where Electoral College started. And it may very well be that this is outmoded and it does need to be revamped. Right. But they were still counting popular votes like 5 days after the election in this country.
And for sure, you know, Republicans are liking the Electoral College and how it works right now.
Right now.
Because, I mean, you know, or ask Obama the last 8 years whether he liked the Electoral College. If it works in your favor, then you like it. If it doesn't, then you don't like it.
Exactly.
It's pretty simple.
But yeah, 200 years ago, it would take them months to collect all those votes. So they had to have a very quick way to sample the states and kind of come to a consensus as to what did the people decide.
And I mean, like, democracy was also a young idea back then. So Electoral College was kind of like a idea of a technological idea of how to do an efficient election in a place that is vast.
Yeah, it was definitely representative of the technology of its time, and you know, and the closer we, you know, the more technological, the more we support science, things of that nature. One could argue that we need to go to a more popular vote. It does bring up an interesting question, though, because on the same side, sometimes older technologies are more secure. You can't really hack a voting ballot. You can, you know, there have been cases where
like a paper one.
You know, there are cases where they've already determined that people have hacked voting booths. You know, going back several elections now.
Or even email voting. That's there's multiple like technological ideas and advances that have been like suggested for like how to do a more secure, more efficient, more accessible to voters even election. So I mean, like if you have like mail ballots or email ballots or internet ballots, that I mean, I'm sure that makes it easier to get to the polls when you don't even have to leave your house.
Right. Providing it's not compromised.
Yeah.
And one thing I was thinking would be really cool is if you got like a paper receipt from your voting machine and it had a code on it, you could go online and you could type in that code and it would confirm who you voted for. It's still anonymous because, you know, it's a one-time generated code, and if you saw an anomaly, you could alert election officials that something was wrong, you know, at your voting place, and it didn't accurately record it. Right. But that requires will. That requires that, you know, that people see the need for that and start talking about, okay, we want a more representative democracy, but we also need a safeguard against fraud and tampering and things like that.
What was voting like for you? like the technology in place and stuff like that?
Back when I was a youngster,
Well, no, like last week.
to be quite honest with you, and I don't mind talking about this, I really couldn't stomach to vote for either of them.
No, I mean like the technology.
The technology in the District of Columbia kind of varied. And, you know, it's interesting because a lot of the people that I know that voted did absentee or by mail. And they got their voting done way early, so they weren't in the lines. But to answer your question is that it depends on the voting. In DC, there actually is a mixture. Some polling stations still do paper, some do electronic. But one of the frustrating things that the people have, suggested with the electronic one is they can't do write-ins.
But also like sometimes that's like a law thing in certain states.
It
where,
is.
Like I vote in Maryland, so
you can't get
you can do write-in, but there is an official list of write-in candidates that you have to choose from. And I think you have to be really careful about how you spell their names too.
Yeah,
it
you
has
do.
to be exact.
You do. But some people will do write-ins as a matter of protest.
Yeah.
They want to say, there's this thing where I didn't vote because that's a vote protest. Some people say, well, I don't want people to think that I'm apathetic, that I just don't care enough to vote. It's, so the way they go in is they write in Mickey Mouse or, Fidel Castro or some other, crazy option to show they took the time to show up and vote.
And you always got to remind people that, it's more than just the president that is being voted on. There are congressmen and women, State House of Representatives, State Senate, local office, ballot initiatives and referendums,
Well, and it's interesting that you point this out because parties have gotten very good at trying to manipulate, how you vote across the board. Like, for instance, they'll have people, they're not intimidating, they're making suggestions. So it's kind of like, I went by
like voter guides? Or?
Well, I went by a polling place, and this person was like, now when you go in, you pick this option to vote for all Democrats or all Republicans all at once.
Yeah, and I think it's called straight line voting.
Yeah, straight line voting, and they've made it so that you can just go in and push a button.
Yeah.
And what if you're elderly and you really like person A's position, at this level of the government, but you like the other candidate, at a different level, you like someone else's position. It's almost gotten to a point where you don't even have to think. You're just voting across party lines, and it's, to me, negatively reinforcing. Instead of making people kind of just go in and evaluate each candidate, they can just go in and go, well, this party best represents me.
And it's also a trade-off, it's like maybe it's more efficient. You don't have to click a bunch of individual boxes, or maybe it's just
only if you want to vote for the party versus the candidate.
And it is something that is probably in the party's best interest. I know California has straight line voting or straight party voting.
Virginia,
Maryland does not.
Well,
and we don't have a. When I voted, it was kind of like a Scantron where you take a pen and fill in a bubble, and then they scan the 2 sheets of ballots into a electronic scanner. But there's still that paper record.
Right.
So if they ever need to count that by hand, they can.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, okay, so we had this election. This is our election process in our country. It is a representative election process that's done through the Electoral College, and a candidate won that the atheist and skeptical community, I think, has expressed a lot of concern over. And there's a lot of reactions going on right now. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, before we get into his policies and proposed policies that may affect science, climate change, religion, separation of church and state, I want to talk a little bit about people's reactions to that.
It's emotional.
It's very, very emotional.
It came as a shock to a lot of people. I know I'd been following 538, I think it's Nate Silver's website, for polling statistics and aggregating various polls and statistics. And up until the day before the election, they had been predicting like 95% or 85% chance that Clinton would win. And then as election day went on, it shifted to Trump being predicted.
Right.
And Trump did win. So it goes to show that, and I think the majority of like the big name polls that are out there in the news, and they got it wrong as far as like their predictions, and
they got it wrong,
or maybe their polling was right and their prediction was wrong. You know,
I think the polling is important, but then how the reporters were reporting was something where I was clearly seeing a bias.
Well,
and
I don't know if I agree with you that polling is important necessarily. I think polling can have effects on the electorate in that it kind of like, you know, if polling says that everybody wants to jump off a bridge, that might make somebody who's on the fence or on the bridge want to jump off the bridge as well. I don't know.
I think it's important to know if a lot of people want to jump off of a bridge. You know, I think that's important to know. I don't know that it means that everyone does, but I think when I say important, I don't mean it's like the end all be all. I think it's important from a way to sample and look at things. But what I'm also seeing is what I saw during a lot of this election was confirmation bias. I also saw what I believe was a lot of echo chamber talk. You know, people were kind of, oh, well, you know, the election is going to go this way because of this. They weren't really going to the other side trying to understand what they were saying. And I think a lot of people got a wake-up call. I think it was a real shock. But I think people who were a little more skeptical, they weren't just like toting particular party lines on either side, that were really trying to understand what was behind, like Trump, for instance. I honestly don't believe Trump was elected because people are misogynistic or racist. I believe that he was elected because he had the appearance of representing a challenge to the status quo, though he is himself status quo. Anybody who really studies Trump knows that he's not really an outsider. He's a person who's benefited from the very system he's claiming to shake up. But I think people who really kind of detached themselves and took more of a scientific view of this election process could tell. I couldn't tell he was going to win, but I could tell it was going to be really close. Like I was looking at it and I was saying within 1%. It was going to be like a 49 to 51%, one way or the other for me. And I was talking to other people, and people on the left were like, yeah, Hillary's going to kick his butt. She's going to landslide victory. And I would listen to other people from the Trump side, like, she's, we're going to teach her and all these other people a lesson. And it's kind of like, I think they missed out on how and why he really was elected.
It's like that for any, strong competition.
I think so.
I think.
I think so.
Whether it's like wrestling matches or sports teams.
But I think it was
there's a lot of smack talk.
I think it was disproportionate in this case because tensions were just so extreme over this. It was like this we've never seen. It was funny because they showed a clip of Nixon having a discussion. I think it was with Kennedy, and he was like, I seriously disagree with my esteemed colleague across the aisle, but and he knows I respect him, but this is a matter of policy differences, not personal attacks. And there was nothing resembling that in this election process. You're going to jail. You're an idiot. Your followers are this, and it just got so heated and this is the thing, when people get emotional, as you pointed out, it was very emotional. People stop thinking analytically and they start thinking emotionally, and I think a lot of people just missed what people who were kind of detached looked at this and saw coming.
But at the same time, I think getting emotional about it totally makes sense. I understand it, on both sides. If you're working for a campaign, that means that you really want this person to get elected usually, or if you're donating large sums of money, relative to the person who's donating it, you're kind of like going all in, or you're invested. It's like almost like a bet. So
you're talking about we're talking about two different forms of emotional here.
But I'm saying
one of
like,
them is you
like,
have one of them is you step because you care about a particular side or position, and you have natural disappointment.
Oh, yeah,
I'm talking about where people are like, oh, we're gonna be killed.
Right.
He's gonna put us in death camps. And there's actual videos of people like having these mental breakdowns on camera, talking about how they they're like wanting to flee across the border, and they're going to be rounded up and executed. And
well, I think there's a lot of additional fear and anxiety because a lot of people have made comparisons between Trump's campaign and Adolf Hitler's rise to power, or just the rhetoric, at times seems a bit over the top, and it's concerning to people. If what you're saying is real and is what you're actually going to do, then it's definitely concerning to people. I mean, if you're going to build a wall that prevents immigrants from, immigrating, then...
Well, I have a problem with a lot of things that Trump said. What I'm talking about is discerning between what he said that's problematic and imaginary threats.
But you can only speculate what's gonna actually happen.
No. You when a candidate makes a promise and they say they're going to do something, you have to treat it serious, as if that's their intent.
I think you got to be more pragmatic.
You do need to. Hang on. You do need to add pragmatism to it. You're absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm.
But nowhere did he ever say he's going to put people in death camps. And for someone to have like breakdowns and being convinced they're going to be dragged away and killed is not based in rational, skeptical thinking.
He's still governed by the Constitution.
He's still governed by the Constitution.
He's still got Congress who has to declare war.
And he hasn't even said that that's what he wants to do. So you're having a mental breakdown about something he hasn't declared, yet when they're having that breakdown, putting the energy in that, they are missing the fact that he has talked about deporting people.
Mm-hmm. Or extreme vetting for legal Muslim immigrants.
Exactly.
Or like a complete shutdown, based on religion, not from country of origin, which is like...
Yeah.
As far as I know, that's like be a brand new discriminatory policy.
It's a bigoted,
not in tune with the First Amendment.
Right. It's not in tune with science and with looking at facts and evidence about where these people come from. But the point I'm making is that if you go and you go, he's going to put us in death camps, right? And then that doesn't happen, where's your credibility? And you've accused that camp of willing to execute you and put you in a death camp. You just convince those people to show up to the polls that much more anyway.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is we've lost the dialogue in this country to communicate with one another. And that's a big problem.
And that's a good transition for something I want to touch on. There's this article and podcast that I came across back in July this year on Freakonomics. It's a radio show on the radio, and they have a podcast. And this episode's called 10 Ideas to Make Politics Less Rotten. And they propose about 10 ideas, suggestions from various people involved in politics, advisors and political scientists, and their reasoning behind these ideas for ways to make, our elections and political system a bit more civil, a bit more fair, stuff like that. These are, because this always comes up in a hotly contested election, It's like, is the Electoral College fair? Did people get disenfranchised? Or were there people or laws preventing people from voting and stuff like that? Or was this past election cycle just like too mean or whatever, And so like one idea would be like open primaries. I know in Maryland where I vote, we have closed primaries. So basically, with the exception of a few like local things like school board maybe, where it's not party related, you can't vote unless you affiliate with Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, you have to be a registered Democrat or Republican.
And I think...
And let me stop real quick. I want to kind of clarify for the viewers. when you're talking about a closed primary, what that means is that the primary being that, say, like the Democrats are going to pick who they want to run for president. In a closed primary, only people who are registered Democrats can participate in that process.
Right.
An open primary, anyone can.
Yeah.
So go on.
And also, you know, opponents of open primaries have said, like, well, what's stopping a Democrat for voting for the weakest Republican, so that when it gets to the general election, you know, it won't be like a weak Republican versus a strong Democrat, or vice versa, you know. But there's not really like a lot of evidence to support that as being like a significant thing that people do.
Well, it's also a weak argument because the other side could do just the opposite. So
Yeah.
it's like it would cancel each other out.
Mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
But like, you know, the argument that I've heard in favor of it is that, you know, these primary elections that happen in the spring, in election years, they're publicly funded, and, you know, public funding of things should be open to as many people as possible, regardless of what the parties want, because, you know, you're using government money to do these things.
Well, also with the open primary, it allows us not to be so dogmatic with our political party.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I might be a Republican or a Democrat, whatever I am, but my second best choice would be, you know, if my Democrat doesn't win, this is the Republican that I want to win. And it allows us to start moving things back to a center point instead of getting so extreme. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree, open primaries is big.
Yeah, and I know plenty of people who don't vote in primaries because they don't feel comfortable affiliating with a party. So there's like a disincentive because they don't want to be perceived as being like affiliated with a party that they don't entirely agree with. You know, they might have a mix of views and like vote sometimes Republican, sometimes Democrat, and don't want to like just be on some list somewhere as registered with a specific party. The other thing that's kind of related to open primaries would be super delegates. Now, the Democratic Party, their current rules for their convention are that there's a certain number of super delegates in some states, and these ones basically, correct me if I'm wrong, they go to who the party wants.
Right. Well, we also saw a lot of that going on with Bernie Sanders, and there was some manipulation, or at least in these WikiLeaks emails, fears that were being expressed over him. And when you're dealing with open primaries, you can reduce a lot of that potential for fraud within the party, because people that are outside of that party are participating, and it's not so much just like, well, who from our inner circle can we put forward, because you have people that are going to vote that process that are not that don't care about your inner circle. So
right, and we saw the effects of, you know, having closed primaries in some states in tandem with the super delegates, and you know, it appears that it swung it in favor of Clinton in the closed primary states, and Bernie Sanders had more of a advantage in the open primary states. I think Trump, as far as Republican primaries, you know, regardless of open or closed, I think he won pretty much all of them, though. Which probably had more to do with the fact that there were so many Republican candidates running all at the same time, you know, versus there was 2 candidates running for the Democratic Party for the majority of the campaign. I mean,
right.
There used to be like 3 or 4 at the very, very first debate, though.
Yeah, well, that's a process of whittling those things down, and you get to see, in theory, who your party's willing to put forward. But again, I said the single biggest advantage to me of open primaries is that it kind of weeds out the extremism in the long run if people are able to kind of like find more of a centrist position.
And that's the other thing. I've heard analysts say that the people who are willing to affiliate themselves with a party for a primary election are more likely to be have more polarized, like far left or far right political leanings.
And atheists and skeptics, at least for me, I wasn't surprised, but I was kind of really turned off by some of the dogmatic fanaticism of people that were, I'd be speaking about Trump people if it were the other way around, so don't think for a moment I'm picking on one side here. But there was like a guy, he's having a breakdown, and he's like, she's my queen, I'd follow her to hell. And I'm like, I want to make sure that people like that, regardless whether they're Democrat or Republican, are not left alone to put forward their ideal candidate, because it scares me. I want the best candidate possible. I want someone who's science-based, science reasoning, who cares about the Constitution. I don't want someone who follows somebody because they see them as a queen or they're purely or a king or dogmatic. And I really like what you're talking about here, because I think it's on the right track. So please continue.
Also, I feel like it wouldn't be fair for us to not mention that Jill Stein was also running for the Green Party ticket.
Yep.
Gary Johnson was running for the Libertarian ticket. And Evan McMullin, I'm not sure if he had a ticket or if he's just an independent, but he's a Mormon, and he was he got a significant number of votes in the Mormon state of Utah.
Utah. I knew you were going to say Utah.
Yeah, and I even saw a very unlikely but possible way of things happening where if there was like a tie in the Electoral College, which is one of the flaws of the Electoral College, you could argue, where if there's like 269 versus 269, and it's possible that could happen, it would go to the House of Representatives to then decide amongst the top 3 vote getters of the popular vote who will be the president. So the top 3 could have possibly included Evan McMullin, because
interesting.
I think Gary Johnson was actually the top 3, but
yeah,
at the time they were projecting that whatchamacallit, Evan McMullin could have gotten at least 1 electoral vote, which I don't think Gary Johnson got any, and I don't know that they were projecting that he would get any.
Well, it's interesting when you brought up Gary Johnson. It brings up something that I was thinking about, where people kind of, when they do the confirmation bias thing, okay, or they think, well, other people think the way I do. And it's interesting because they had people say, oh, well, you see, he took votes from Hillary Clinton. And it's like, how do you know he didn't take votes from Donald Trump?
Right.
And everybody always thinks that if you vote for the third candidate, you're throwing your vote away, as if that vote would go to your side to begin with. Yeah. It's bad thinking.
I'm of the thinking that, the vote belongs to each individual voter, and don't let people make you feel bad about how you used it. You didn't steal from anybody.
And I'll take the unpopular position, and I'm not, and I'm not saying Scott agrees with this because I haven't asked him. It's okay not to vote and say that you don't vote because you think that both candidates are disgusting, or it's like, I think people. I think the fact that this election was so polarized, and yet we still had like half the country didn't turn out to vote. Yeah. I think that says something. This is something to me.
What is it, like 130 million people voted, and we've got like 350 million?
Something like that, yeah. So I mean, it says something to me. It's just like absolutely insane as this was.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the biggest voter turnouts in our country's history, at least recent. Well, I mean,
I think so.
Yeah, percentage-wise, because obviously the actual numbers keep growing of people in this country.
Yeah.
But it speaks volumes that people just were like, no, can't do it. That's what my position was when it came, at least to those two. I was just like, can't stomach it. No.
Yeah, and here's another idea that was proposed by that article. to get rid of cheering and or jeering and heckling and stuff like that at presidential debates. So there's this widely mentioned example of, I think it was Walter Mondale and who was it, Dan Quayle, where they're like, it's like Dan Quayle, I think, or one of the candidates said like, well, I was working with like JFK, blah, blah, blah. And then the other guy says like, I knew JFK, you are no JFK, or something like that. And then the crowd goes wild. And they're like, it's hilarious. And it's, obvious that he like practiced this line, but if you're at home listening to it on your like shortwave radio or watching it on your like black and white TV, then you're like, you're going to be biased possibly by the crowd reaction. It's like, oh, the crowd is favoring the comments of this guy. Well, so the idea is to get rid of the audio, or either get rid of the audio of the audience or get rid of the audience. Because and also,
well,
like,
I want to correct you, man. Dan Quayle was not in the age of shortwave radios and black and white TVs.
Okay,
I mean, it was a while ago, but But go on.
I'm probably confusing like a lot of
your
vice presidential candidates.
Yeah, your point is well taken.
Video available on C-SPAN.
Exactly. Thank you. But this brings up something I wanted to talk about. What you're talking about is false narratives. And people see something and they go, oh, well, this is the way everyone else feels. Mm-hmm. And I want to take a moment and talk about something that might be a little controversial. This is a perspective that I kind of came to where I saw like an echo chamber from a lot of people. And again, the other side, Republicans do this too, where where it came clear to me is when I saw people like Anita Sarkeesian, Lacey Green, and they're having these breakdowns and shocks. And these are the very people that block comments on their websites. They don't allow.
They're content producers also though.
Yeah, they're content producers. My point is that some of the most visceral reactions that I saw from people that were considered leftists are also some of the most least tolerant people on the internet. And
I think that's an effective polarization.
Let me finish my thought. This is a problem we have where people were shocked. Anita Sarkeesian's like, well, we're all still in shock. It's like, but you guys create echo chambers. You guys you silence people, you shame people, you shut them down. You are the person that is least likely to have seen this coming. And kind of like what you're saying, and I'm not saying you're endorsing this, where I'm coming from with this, but we both recognize a need for civil discussion and not letting kind of like emotional like outburst or shutting people out or visceral reactions kind of dictate dialogue. I think, when Hillary called half Trump supporters a basket of deplorables, this isn't substantive. It isn't an explanation of what
it's pejorative.
It's pejorative, rhetorical, and jeering and cheering is exactly the same thing. It is not constructive. It doesn't actually say that the candidate you're cheering or jeering is right or wrong.
Yeah, so, and I mean, anyone who works in entertainment knows that the effects of playing off your audience. If your audience is cheering for something you just said, then you roll with it. Or if they like boo, then you like cut it out. Exactly. So that you don't want to. You got to maintain.
Sorry, we need our politics to be boring and scientific.
Yeah, and speaking of our politics being boring and scientific, or at least boring, California, I think this year might be the first time they tried this little experiment called Top 2 Primary, where they have a primary, I think it's open, not quite sure, but regardless, whoever the top 2 vote getters during the primary, regardless of party, those are the top 2, the only 2 who will end up on the general election ballot. So just as it happens, they had 2 Democratic candidates going against or campaigning against each other in the general election for the U.S. Senate seat. Also, they happen to be 2 females, and also they happen to be 2 non-white people.
Well, I just want to kind of roll back a moment and talk a bit about Dave Silverman, an American atheist, and Jamila Bey when they went to CPAC. They caught a lot of hell for going to CPAC. There are people who are calling them sellouts and traitors, as if they thought that they own what atheists were supposed to vote politically: Republican, Democrat, Conservative, Liberal. Do you guys that were putting down Dave Silverman, American Atheist, and Jamila Bey understand the importance of having cracks, getting into cracks wherever you can? Do you understand that you don't always retain power the way you think you should, that you should have dialogue, you should have allies on the other side? Do you get it yet, the value of that move? It's vital. It's vital to be involved and engaged and not live in those echo chambers. It's vital to get people that don't share your views on everything, but on some things, to build bridges with you where you can. So I have to say again, I appreciate now more than ever the American Atheist involvement in CPAC, and I think we're going to probably see Republicans who want separation of church and state forming more of an alliance now than ever in the past with groups like American Atheist, because they also feel threatened by people like Mike Pence and some of the religious zealots that look like they're going to be coming on board with Donald Trump.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about some of the proposed candidate or picks? I guess.
Yeah.
What are they called? Appointments to the presidential.
Yeah, the presidential
thing.
appointments.
The
cabinet.
Cabinet, yes, cabinet members, like different department secretaries and heads and.
Well, it seems to be changing. Like, he proposed some people, and now he's kind of picking others. And
I don't think this is an official list either.
I don't think so
either. It might be BuzzFeed leak.
I think you said something to me that really resonated true, Scott. And when you said it, it was like, I was thinking the same thing. It's like when Trump was sitting there with Obama, he had this look on his face.
At the White House press conference.
Where he just looked nervous as hell, like, what do I do? Like, what do I do? Oh my God, I won. What do I do? And now he's surrounded by people saying, this is what you should do. And some of these people...
don't repeal Obamacare entirely.
Yeah. Exactly, and he's changed on that. But some of the people that are telling him what to do are to pray to God for divine guidance, and some people are like,
it might be a good start
for him. And some people are like, well, you need to erode away separation of church and state, or you need to get rid of. I mean, you have people like Ben Carson. He's thinking about putting the head of
education.
Do you know what Ben Carson's policies are related to religion? They're pretty daggone scary, if you ask me.
Yeah. For example, he believes that Joseph the prophet used the pyramids to store grain in times of famine.
Yeah, it was a very well thought out scientific analogy there. I'm sure he's got all sorts of data.
Maybe he'd be good. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that Mike Pence is a big one. And I know that there's some people running around calling for Trump's assassination. And I'm like, well, first of all, violence isn't the answer. But secondly, if he does, just Mike Pence, whatever you think about Donald Trump, you don't want Mike Pence at the controls. You just don't. This is a guy who is a total, Trump has said some anti-vax things. Pence is anti-vax. He is definitely against this idea of global warming, being caused by humans. He's a climate change denier. And I don't mean that in a roundabout way. I mean that is he is dedicated to taking that position. And has some very serious religiously extreme points of view. Now, having said all of this,
which makes him popular with Christians.
It makes him popular with Christians. But having said all this does not mean that they are going to push or will push or push beyond just doing it from a propaganda standpoint, some of these policies. Trump, I don't think is a man of the people, but he ran on the ticket as being a man of the people.
He's a billionaire.
He's a billionaire.
But then again, George Washington, he had $500 million.
There you go. And in his time.
And we have a history of very rich presidents.
Yeah.
So it's not anything new. Clinton's a millionaire running against a billionaire.
I mean, someone can have a religious point of view, but still also not necessarily want to force that on others. That doesn't mean, though, that it doesn't influence in subtle ways the way that they view the world and the way they push their policies, which deeply concerns me. But what I'm trying to tell people is don't lose hope. You don't have to freak out. And remember the fact that atheists are being elected, as you pointed out.
Yeah. And Congress, I think, is becoming more diverse, both gender-wise and ethnicity-wise, and maybe even religion-wise. Well,
our population is.
Yeah.
Our population is.
Yeah, and eventually maybe Congress will start to reflect that.
I think so.
These demographic shifts.
When you see people take extreme points of view, it's typically because they are on the decline. It's them pushing back. The more radical someone is, typically it means that the less accepted they are. They're trying to impose and enforce something that they see they're losing control of. So we only got 2 minutes left and we have so much. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up in a few months.
Yeah.
To see where the country is.
Yeah, hopefully America won't tear itself to shreds, and we still have a constitution. We still have Supreme Court. We still have checks and balances, separation of powers. There's still stuff in place. This isn't the first time that a president of the same party as the control in the Congress have been in power at the same time. So, I mean, the likelihood that horrible things will happen or super duper great things will happen, it's probably unlikely. It'll probably be very boring. I don't know.
I don't know either.
But
what I do know is that for the first time in a long time, Donald Trump closed his acceptance speech without saying "God bless America." It hasn't been done in a long time. Sam Harris has indicated that he has some suspicions as to what Donald Trump states versus what he thinks what the guy really thinks. Maybe he's less religious than people give him credit for. But Scott, great job today. And folks, we're down to about 5 seconds. Make sure to tune in next week. Follow us on Facebook. Aaron Raw is still coming on.